بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is our fourth lesson on providing a brief commentary on Risalat al-Jami'ah. In this lesson, we'll be talking about the obligatory aspects of prayer, or sometimes they're referred to as integrals of prayer. They're essentially things that if your prayer has them, your prayer is valid. If your prayer doesn't have them, doesn't have one or more of them, your prayer is invalid. That's arkan or furud of salah, or wajibat of salah. So we'll be just covering the integral aspects in this lesson. We won't be covering sunnah aspects of prayer. This is a bare bones description of what the prayer is. It doesn't mean that you should perform a prayer with only the bare bone aspects, or only a prayer comprised only of the integrals and leave off the sunan, or leave off the sunnah aspects. But it's good to differentiate between the two. If you hear that something is sunnah, that should make you want to do it. It shouldn't make you want to leave it aside. But it's good to be able to differentiate between what is an obligatory or integral part of prayer and what's a sunnah aspect of prayer, to deal with various scenarios. One is that if you don't have time, or if you're unwell, or you want to restrict your prayer to just the bare bone elements, you can. And you'd be able to know that your prayer is valid. Moreover, maybe a more pertinent example is that if you for whatever reason you forget to do something in your prayer, you'll be able to tell whether or not your prayer is still valid. So if you're praying and, for example, after reciting the Fatiha, you forget to recite a surah and you just go into ruku', or you forget to recite the verses of the Quran and you bow, and then you think to yourself, well, I haven't recited anything after the Fatiha. Is my prayer valid or invalid? And if you've looked over this lesson, you would know that the author doesn't mention reciting any Quran after the Fatiha. That's because it's not an integral part of the prayer. So in this scenario, your prayer would be valid. But if you can't differentiate between the two, you might think, well, I have to go back and recite something because it's a necessary part of the prayer. So it's important that's why books of fiqh would differentiate between the two, for these two reasons and for other reasons. Okay, we'll consider sunnah aspects in a following lesson. The author, rahimahullah, says furud al-salah. So we covered, when we did wudu, we covered the word fard, and we said that it's used synonymously with arkan and wajib. Fard is used synonymously with arkan and wajib. In books of fiqh, in books of Shafi'i fiqh, we use fard synonymously with wajib, except in one chapter, which we mentioned, which is the chapter of Hajj. So when we get to the chapter of Hajj, we'll see that there's a difference between fard and wajib. But for the rest of the chapters of law, fard and wajib mean the same thing in books of Shafi'i fiqh. The number of arkan will differ depending on whether or not we count the body coming to the rest as a specific pillar or not. So you'll see when we jump into the arkan, one of the pillars that the author mentions is itmitnan, which is the body coming to a complete stop or rest. So some authors will consider that to be an independent pillar. So they'll count the pillars of prayer to be approximately 17. So for example, Imam al-Nawawi in al-Rawda counts it as an independent pillar. So every time he comes to a position, so for example, when you bow, he would count that as one rukn, or one pillar, or integral, and your body coming to a complete stop would be a separate pillar. So that would be 2. So you'd count the entire number would be 17. Other authors like Imam Bafadl al-Muqaddimat al-Hadramiyya, for example, counts them as 1. So performing the ruku' and coming to a complete stop is just one integral of prayer. So depending on whether or not you count them as an independent, or depending on whether or not you count it as an independent pillar or not, it would obviously affect the number of integrals that you end up with. But essentially the idea is the same. So the actual number isn't that important. But we'll be running through these pillars in a step-by-step fashion, starting from the beginning of prayer to the end of prayer. So this will give you an idea of, like I said, the skeleton of the prayer. And we'll be able to fill in details or sunan in a later lesson, inshallah. The proof text for most of these pillars is a hadith mentioned by Abu Hurairah by the Shaykhan, Bukhari and Muslim. The Shaykhan are the two Shaykhs, Bukhari and Muslim. So in the science of hadith, if you say the two Shaykhs, or Shaykhan if the word is marfu', or Shaykhain if the word is majroor, refer to Bukhari and Muslim, the compilers of the two Sahih books, or two Sahih works. So this hadith narrated by Abu Hurairah is about a person who performed his prayer badly. That's how the narration is known. It's a person the narration states that the Prophet ﷺ entered the masjid, and that a person entered after him and performed a prayer, and then came and greeted the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, who returned his greeting and said, "Go back and pray, for you haven't prayed." So the man went back and prayed and came back and greeted the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet returned his greeting and said the same thing: "Go back and re-perform your prayer, because you haven't prayed." And they did this 3 times until the man said to the Prophet ﷺ, "By the one who has sent you with the truth, I don't know anything other than this, so teach me." Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ said, when you get up to pray, say the takbir, then read what you can of the Quran, then bow until you're at rest, then bow until you are at a rest, then straighten up until you're at a rest, until you're standing straight, then prostrate until your body is at rest, and then arise until you're sitting at rest, and do the same thing for the rest of your prayer. So this hadith by Abu Hurairah has more or less all of the pillars. So that's the main proof text for our discussion on what are pillars and what are not. The author, may Allah be pleased with him, says, an-niyya. An-niyya, the intention, is, not surprisingly, our first integral or pillar of prayer. Every act of worship, in Shafi'i fiqh, every act of worship needs an appropriate intention. It's an appropriate intention that is concurrent with the beginning of the action. So in this case, you might remember when we did wudu, the first action is washing the face. So your niyyah has to be concurrent with you washing your face. When it comes to prayer, the first action is the takbiratul ihram, or saying Allahu Akbar. So your niyyah has to be concurrent with the takbiratul ihram. And being at the same time as takbiratul ihram just means that when you're doing the takbiratul ihram, when you're saying Allahu Akbar, that the niyyah has to be in your mind, such that you're not thinking about something else, or you forget your niyyah while you're doing it. That's what it means for the niyyah to be at the same time as the takbiratul ihram. Okay, the place, that's the time of the niyyah. The place of the niyyah is in the heart. Okay, and nothing else suffices without it. So a person can say the niyyah before they do the takbiratul ihram, which a lot of people do. But that in and of itself isn't the niyyah. The niyyah is something that is present in the heart when the person is performing the takbiratul ihram. Okay, so you can't say both. You're not saying the two things at the same time. So if you're saying the niyyah, that's something extra to the actual niyyah, which has to be present in the heart when you're doing when you're saying or reciting the takbiratul ihram. Okay, so even if a person recites the niyyah, if they recite, I'm going to pray dhuhr, for example, or in Arabic, for example, usalli fard al-dhuhr, for example, before they do the takbiratul ihram, but by the time they get to the takbiratul ihram, they're not really thinking about what they're doing, that wouldn't be sufficient. Okay. So let's talk about 3 types of intentions with respect to 3 different types of prayers that a person could perform. If a person wants to perform, the 3 types of prayers we'll be talking about is a niyyah for an obligatory prayer, a niyyah for a sunnah prayer that has a specific time or a specific cause. And third, just a general non-obligatory prayer. Okay, so the first one, if a person wants to pray an obligatory prayer, if you're going to pray an obligatory prayer, then there's three aspects to your intention. Okay, there's three aspects. The first is, I'll tell you what it is in Arabic. The first one is qasdul fi'l. The second one is a ta'yin. And the third one is fardiyya. First one is qasdul fi'l. The third one is a ta'yin. And the second one is a ta'yin. And the third one is fardiyya. The first one, qasdul fi'l, is just intending a specific action. So in this case, the action that you're intending is to pray. Okay, so you have to have that as part of your intention that you're praying. That's the specific action that you're performing. The second one is ta'yin. Ta'yin is specifying what kind of prayer you're praying. Which type of prayer you're praying. So, for example, are you praying dhuhr or are you praying asr? Okay, so a person has to have that in mind at the start when they're performing the takbiratul ihram. So, for example, if a person goes to pray and it's about mid-afternoon and they start praying, or they say Allahu Akbar, which is the takbiratul ihram, and then they think to themselves, wait, 1 second, am I praying dhuhr or am I praying asr? That right there is a solid indication that the person didn't have this ta'yin or specifying what prayer it is when it came to as part of their intention. Okay, so a person has to have that in mind at the beginning. Okay, so if a person were to do that and they were to say to themselves, wait, I don't know, am I praying dhuhr or asr? Oh, I didn't pray dhuhr, this is actually dhuhr. That wouldn't be sufficient. A person would have to start the prayer again. Okay, because an important aspect of their niyyah is lacking when they started the prayer. Okay. And the same goes for any other prayer. It's not just specifically dhuhr or asr. It could be any prayer. It could be a confusion between maghrib or isha or anything in general. So if a person gets up to pray fajr, for example, and they start praying, and then they think to themselves, wait, am I praying the sunnah of fajr or am I praying the fard of fajr? I didn't really think about it beforehand. Okay, that again would mean that their intention is lacking in an important respect, and they'd have to go back and start the prayer again, and know for sure what they're doing when they're doing it. Okay. That's ta'yin, which is the second aspect. The third one is fardiyya. So you have to intend that you're performing an obligatory prayer as opposed to a non-obligatory prayer. Okay, these are the three aspects: qasdul fi'l, which is intending a specific action; a ta'yin, what prayer is it; and fardiyya, whether it's a fard or whether it's an obligatory or a non-obligatory prayer. That's the three aspects. It sounds complicated, but it's not. If you start praying and your intention is, I'm praying the fard of dhuhr, that's the three aspects. Okay, I'm praying, which is qasdul fi'l, which is intending an action. The fard of dhuhr, the fard prayer, that's your fardiyya, the third aspect. And dhuhr is your ta'yin, or specifying what prayer it is. Okay, so it's really simple, but when we talk about it in this sort of like legal fashion, it might seem complicated, but it actually is really simple. Okay, so like I'm praying the fard of dhuhr is an appropriate intention that covers all our aspects, covers all our bases. The second type of prayer that you could be praying is you're praying a non-obligatory prayer that has a specific time, such as the sunnah prayers before or after an obligatory prayer. Okay, so the sunnah prayers before or after an obligatory prayer obviously have a specific time. That's their time, before or after an obligatory prayer. Or it can have a specific cause. So like the prayer for like a solar or a lunar eclipse would have a specific cause. So for either of these types of sunnah prayers or non-obligatory prayers, a person would have to have the first two things that we mentioned, which again are qasdul fi'l, which is intending an action, and the second thing would be a ta'yin, which is you're specifying what you're doing. Okay, to differentiate it from other things or other prayers that you could possibly be praying. So to give you an example, I'm praying Taraweeh, for example. I'm praying the Taraweeh prayers in Ramadan. The Taraweeh prayers. So I'm praying the Taraweeh prayers, combine the two things that we mentioned. The first is qasdul fi'l, which is what you're doing, and the Taraweeh prayers, you're specifying what prayers they are. Okay, and those are our two aspects. Or I'm praying the sunnah prayers before dhuhr. I'm praying 2 rak'ahs before dhuhr. For example, I'm praying 2 units of prayer before dhuhr. Those are your two aspects, your two things again, your qasdul fi'l and your ta'yin, you're specifying, and your intention to perform an action. Okay, last but not least is just a non-obligatory prayer that you're performing that doesn't have a specific time and doesn't have a specific cause. Okay, just any non-obligatory prayer. So if I get up right now and I want to pray, perform 2 rak'ahs, there's no specific reason for it. There's no specific cause for it. No external cause for it. That is, of course, permissible, right? To get up and perform non-obligatory prayers. All you would need is the first thing. The first thing that we mentioned, which is qasdul fi'l, which is you're just intending to pray. That's all you would need for an intention. I'm praying. Okay. The author says, وَتَكْبِيرَةُ الْإِحْرَامِ مَعَ النِّيَّةِ. وَتَكْبِيرَةُ الْإِحْرَامِ مَعَ النِّيَّةِ. That's the takbiratul ihram, which we already mentioned. It's to say Allahu Akbar at the beginning of your prayer with the niyyah. Okay. There are some conditions to the takbiratul ihram, to saying Allahu Akbar. It has to be said when a person is standing. That's for an obligatory prayer, right? So we covered in our last lesson cases in which a person can sit down and perform the prayer, but I'm speaking about the majority of cases. So when a person is standing, they'd have to say the takbiratul ihram when they're standing. They'd also have to be at rest. That means that if you come to the masjid or the musalla where people are praying, for example, and you rush to join them, and while you're still moving, you say the takbiratul ihram, you say Allahu Akbar, and then you stop, that wouldn't be sufficient. You actually have to have stopped first and then say the takbiratul ihram. Okay, so your body has to be at rest, not moving. Okay, you have to be facing the qibla. You have to be facing the qibla with your chest. Okay, and you have to be able to hear it yourself. Okay. You have to be able to hear it yourself. So you say it aloud so that you can hear it. Not that others can hear it, but if someone's next to you, not that they would hear it, but that you can hear yourself. Okay, there are some other conditions that books of fiqh mention, but we'll restrict ourselves to those. If you want a more complete list, there's a more complete list in Safinatun Najah. The author mentions maybe, I think, 16 conditions for the takbiratul ihram, but these are the most important ones. Okay, why is it called takbiratul ihram? Why is it called takbiratul ihram? It's called takbiratul ihram because by doing it, certain things that were permissible before become impermissible. Okay, so like eating and drinking and speaking, for example, are permissible before the takbiratul ihram. But when you do that, or when you say or recite the takbiratul ihram, that puts you, or that enters you into a state of prayer by which certain things that were permissible become impermissible, and that's why it's called takbiratul ihram. Okay. The author says, وَقِرَاءَةُ الْفَاتِحَةِ مَعَ الْبَسْمَلَةِ. Oh, the takbiratul ihram, just go back very quickly to the takbiratul ihram, it has to be said in Arabic. Okay, a person who's able to do so, they have to learn how to do it. Okay. If a person doesn't know how to recite it and didn't have time to learn it, they could translate it into a different language. But they wouldn't say something different instead of it. When we get to the Fatiha, you'll see that you can say different things instead of it under certain conditions. But for the takbiratul ihram, no. You could translate it into a different language, but that's only if you didn't have time to learn it. Okay, but those are very rare circumstances. For the most part, it's very easy to learn, and people have the ability to learn it, and so that's an obligation. Okay, and the author says ma'a niyya, like we said, the niyya has to be concurrent with the takbiratul ihram. Okay, the author says what takbiratul ihram, but doesn't say anything about raising the hands. So is raising the hands an integral of prayer or a sunnah aspect? Yeah, it's a sunnah aspect. Okay, so a person can just come and say that, or recite the takbiratul ihram and say Allahu Akbar, and that will put them in a state of prayer. Okay, raising the hands is sunnah with it. Okay. Moving on to the next one, the author says وَقِرَاءَةُ الْفَاتِحَةِ مَعَ الْبَسْمَلَةِ. وَقِرَاءَةُ الْفَاتِحَةِ مَعَ الْبَسْمَلَةِ, that's reciting the Fatiha, Surah Al-Fatiha, with the Basmala. Okay. Surah Al-Fatiha is, of course, the first chapter in the Quran, starting with Bismillah and ending with وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. Okay. Ameen, of course, isn't part of the Fatiha. Ameen, which the author doesn't mention, is Sunnah. Okay, Al-Fatiha ends with وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. Okay, the Fatiha, in the Shafi'i school, the Fatiha must be recited. No matter what kind of prayer it is, if it has to be recited in every unit of prayer, in an obligatory and in non-obligatory prayers, whether or not you're praying alone or with others, irrespective of whether you're the imam or following an imam, and irrespective of whether the prayer is a loud prayer or a silent prayer. A loud prayer is a prayer in which you recite aloud, and a silent prayer is one in which you would recite silently. So a silent prayer is like Dhuhr and Asr, and the prayers in which you recite aloud are Fajr and Maghrib and Isha. Okay, so pretty much in any circumstance you would recite the Fatiha, okay, as opposed to some other schools in which there are cases in which you don't have to recite the Fatiha. In the Shafi'i school, you must recite the Fatiha no matter what. Okay, and that's the proof for the Shafi'i position is that the Prophet ﷺ said, "La salata liman lam yaqra bi Fatihatil Kitab." Okay, that's the famous Shafi'i proof. "La salata liman lam yaqra bi Fatihatil Kitab." That there is no prayer for someone that hasn't recited the opening of the book, Fatihatil Kitab, the opening of the book or the opening chapter of the book, which refers to Surah Al-Fatiha. Okay, and the hadith is recorded by Bukhari and Muslim. So the Shafi'i school takes this general proof at its generality, and so it applies it to every prayer that you could possibly pray, which I explained at the beginning of this integral. Okay, the author, rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy on him, mentions three conditions for the Fatiha. So we'll go over them. The first one that he mentions is, he says, ma'al basmala. Okay, so a person has to recite the entire Fatiha. So he says with the basmala because the basmala is considered a verse of the Fatiha. The basmala, of course, is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That's called the basmala. It's part of the Fatiha, so a person has to recite it with the Fatiha. If they don't recite it, that means that the recitation of the Fatiha is incomplete, obviously, because it's missing an entire verse. And if their Fatiha is incomplete, that means that their rak'ah, or their unit of prayer, that specific unit of prayer is incomplete as well. Okay, and it would affect the validity of the prayer if they don't make it up. Okay. The second one that the author mentions is taking into account the shaddas. He says what tashdidat al-arba'a ashrata. He says the 14 shaddas, or it's 14 shaddas. A shadda is just or the tashdidat that he's talking about here are just letters that have a shadda on them. Okay, so the first condition that he mentioned was reciting all of the verses. Here he's mentioning reciting all of the letters. Okay, because a shadda is actually tantamount to two letters. So For example, the word iyaka, which has a shadda on the ya, is actually two yas. Okay, so if you miss a shadda, you're missing a letter, so that would mean that your recitation of the word is invalid. Okay, and that would affect again the validity of the entire surah. So he says, what tashdidat al-arba'a ashrata, he says you have to recite the 14 shaddas that are present in the Fatiha. So there's 14 in the Fatiha and there's 3 in the Basmala. We can count them. There's 3 in the Basmala. There's 1 in Allah, Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. And then Alhamdulillahi, there's in Allah, there's the shadda in the word Allah. And Rabb. And then Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. And then in Ad-Din. And then Iyaka. And then Iyaka. And then in As-Sirat. And then in Alladina. And then Dhalin. The last word of the Fatiha in Dhalin on the Dad. And on the Lam. And that's 14. Is that 14? I think it's 14. Yeah. Okay. So those are the. If you don't recite the shadda, then your recitation of the word would be invalid. Okay. The third one that the author mentions, he says, وَإِخْرَاجُ الضَّادِ مِنَ الضَّاءِ وَلَيْسَ فِي الْفَاتِحَةِ ضَاءٌ وَلَيْسَ فِي الْفَاتِحَةِ ضَاءٌ. Okay, وَإِخْرَاجُ الضَّادِ مِنَ الضَّاءِ is to differentiate or to correctly pronounce the dad so that you're not pronouncing it as al-dha. So this third condition that the author, may Allah be pleased with him, mentions is to pronounce the letters correctly, so that you're not pronouncing one letter as another letter. Okay, so he mentions reciting the dad properly, which is the letter after sad, and not pronouncing it as al-dha, the letter after tha. Okay, if you recite a al-dad as al-dha, then your recitation of the word would be invalid as well. Okay, and that's not acceptable from someone who's capable or hasn't taken the appropriate steps to learning how to recite the Fatiha properly, or how to recite letters properly. Okay, a person, if they're able to recite it, or if they're able to learn how to recite it, it's obligatory for them to do so. They have to learn how to do it properly. Okay, if a person recites it by mistake improperly, or if they're actually unable to recite it properly, then it would remain valid. But the vast majority of people are able to do it, and they're able to learn as well. Okay, so people need to take care to ensure that they're doing things properly. Okay, and not have this sort of a lackadaisical approach to worship in which anything goes. Anything that people do and they take seriously, they want to do it properly. So when people get into running, they want to make sure that their stride is correct, that their gait is correct, that the way that their posture is correct, that they're using the right shoes, that they have the right gear and the right equipment. Everything, like the entire thing from start to finish, has to be correct. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time. And the same thing goes. I'm giving you athletic examples. Like going to the gym, it's the same thing. You want to make sure that you're lifting the weights properly, that the way your arm moves is correct, that your posture, your stance, all of these things are correct. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time, right? So that's the attitude that people have towards things that are relatively not important. So people should have a similar attitude to things that are important, or the most important thing, which is their prayer. Okay, so they shouldn't have this kind of attitude that I'm just going to recite it however I feel like, and I don't really need to put the time or the effort into learning how to do it. This is important, so people should give it its due importance as well, inshallah. Okay, and he says, وَلَيْسَ فِي الْفَاتِحَةِ ضَاءٌ, that there is no dha in the Fatiha, which is true, but there is a dad. Okay, in وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. There are some rulings that are related to the Fatiha. If a person doesn't know the Fatiha at all, that person can recite 7 other verses that are of an equivalent length or that come up to an equivalent length of the Fatiha from the Quran. He can recite any 7 verses. So even if they're not in order, and even when you put them together, they don't have any sort of coherent meaning, a person can do that. So if a person knows قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ, for example, إِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرَ, and he just knows these verses, he can put them together, and if it comes up to the same length of the Fatiha, he can recite it, if a person doesn't know the Fatiha. Okay. If a person doesn't know any of that, they don't know any Quran, they can recite different things that would fall under the general rubric of dhikr. Dhikr. So any type of invocation, any type of prayers or du'as, a person can recite instead. So anything that falls within the general understanding or rubric of dhikr would count. So Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, Rabbi Ghfirli, any of those things, when you put them together, if they come up to the length of the Fatiha, a person can recite them instead of the Fatiha. Okay. Okay, barring that, if a person doesn't know any other Quran or they don't know any dhikr, they wouldn't translate it. They wouldn't recite the Fatiha in its translation. They would just stand silent for the time that it would take to recite the verses of the Fatiha. Okay, it would be wajib for them to stand for that period. Okay, and that's the recitation of the Fatiha. The next integral aspect of prayer that the author mentions is ruku', bowing. He says ثُمَّ الرُّكُوعُ. That's the next obligatory aspect, and it's the second main position or it's the second noticeable position in prayer. And it's actually, scholars say that it's a unique aspect of our prayer. It's a unique aspect of the Muslim prayer, and that's why the Quran sometimes specifies ruku' when it's talking about prayer, or it singles out bowing amongst other aspects of prayer because it's unique to our prayer. So for example, the Quran says, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَارْكَعُوا مَعَ الرَّاكِعِينَ. The Quran says, uphold prayer and give alms. وَارْكَعُوا مَعَ الرَّاكِعِينَ, that's bow with those who bow. So some scholars say, why does the Quran say bow with those who bow? Why does it single out ruku'? As opposed to, for example, sujood, prostration. Why doesn't the Quran say, وَاسْجُدُوا مَعَ السَّاجِدِينَ, prostrate with those who prostrate? They say that because ruku' is a unique aspect of the Muslim prayer. So it's drawing attention to that. So sujood or prostration is present in some other religions, like religions of the people of the book, for example, or it'd be a form of worship that they're familiar with, but ruku' isn't. So that's why the Quran singles it out. The Quran says when addressing Maryam or Mary, the Quran says, Ya Maryam uqniti li rabbiki wasjudi warka'i ma'a raki'in. So the Quran addressing Maryam says, Mary, be devout in your worship and prostrate. Be devout to your Lord and prostrate, wasjudi warka'i ma'a raki'in, and bow with those who bow. They say, well, looking at the verse, commentators say, why does the Quran change, or why does the Quran have this kind of order where it mentions sujood before ruku', whereas ruku' comes before sujood, bowing comes before sujood in the prayer, right? So if the Quran changes the order of something out of its natural order, it's because there's a rhetorical reason for it. Okay, you might remember when we talked about wudu that we mentioned this as well, that there's a rhetorical reason for something coming out of order. So they say here that the Quran mentions it splits the order of prayer and puts bowing after prostration, even though it's the other way around, because it wants to draw attention to that unique aspect of prayer that is unique to the Muslim prayer. Okay, and the thing that differentiates it from other worship that other people might be familiar with. Okay, that's a bit of an aside. The author says, وَيَجِبُ أَن يَنْحَنِيَ بِحَيْثُ تَنَالُ رَاحَتَهُ رُكْبَتَيْهِ. that it's obligatory for a person to bend down such that their palms would reach their knees. Rahatahu are the palms. Okay, and palms is the same thing in Arabic as it is in English. It refers to this region of the hand, not the inside of the fingers. Okay, it means the same thing. Okay, so the author says that a person has to bend down such that their palms would reach their knees, but not that a person has to put their hands on their knees. That aspect is a sunnah and not an integral of the prayer. So if a person were to put their hands above their knees or below their knees, their ruku' would still be valid. Okay, but it has to be such that a normal person, that their hands would reach their knees. Okay, this he says an yanhaniya, to bend or to incline. Some books will mention that a person has to bend without bending their knees. Okay. Some people think that that means that when you're making the ruku' you can't bend your knees. But that's not what it means. A person, if you're strong enough or a healthy person, you can bend down without bending your knees. But if you have a problem with maybe your thighs or your knees or your hamstrings or whatever it is, you might need to bend your knees a little bit while you're going into ruku', and that's okay. What they're referring to is that, or what they mean when they say that, is that you're not doing something that is different from ruku'. So you're not ducking down. You're not bending your knees such that you're ducking down, or you're not doing something that's like squatting. So you're not bending your knees and going down, and that's the only thing that you're bending, such that, if you squat, for example, your hands would reach your knees, right? But that's not the point here. The point here is to bend at the waist such that, to the point where your hands can reach your knees. So that's what they say when they mean don't without bending your knees. They're referring to that. Okay, if a person does that, like they duck down or they squat, that would invalidate their prayer. That's not something that you can do. Okay. Okay, the author here, in his description of the ruku', he's talking about a minimalist ruku'. That's the bare minimum. The fuller or the complete ruku' would be to have your back and your neck in a straight line. Okay, and to have your legs straight up to the waist as well, and for you to hold the knees. That would be the complete ruku'. Would be to have your back and your neck in a straight line, and your legs straight up to your waist, and your hands on your knees. That's the complete ruku'. The author, may Allah be pleased with him, says, وَيَطْمَئِنُّ فِيهِ وُجُوبًا حَتَّى تَسْكُنَ أَعْضَاؤُهُ. Yeah, that means that a person should hold that position or keep that position until his body is at rest. Okay, and what that means is that there has to be a clear demarcation between a person's ruku', their bowing, and their coming up, which will be the next integral of prayer that we cover. So you have to be able to differentiate the two, that it's not just one fluid motion. So you don't just go down and then come back up again. There has to be a demarcation between the two in the Shafi'i school. Okay, my dad used to liken it to a car coming to a complete stop. So in Canada, you have to, at a stoplight, when you're driving, when you hit the stop, or when you come up to the stoplight, your car has to come to a complete stop. Okay, not a rolling stop. So it's the same thing with a ruku'. Your body can't be like, it has to come to a complete stop, not a sort of a rolling stop, and you continue with your prayer. Okay, it's a rukn, or it's an integral of prayer in the Shafi'i school. It doesn't have to be a long stop, it just has to be long enough that a person can say Subhanallah in it. Okay, but it has to be there. The author then says, ثُمَّ الْإِعْتِدَالُ وَيَطْمَئِنُّ فِيهِ وُجُوبًا. ثُمَّ الْإِعْتِدَالُ وَيَطْمَئِنُّ فِيهِ وُجُوبًا. Al-i'tidal is coming back up, or the standing position right after bowing. Okay, it's standing back up. It actually isn't. It isn't standing back up. I'm speaking about someone who's standing up to pray. But al-i'tidal is really to go back to the position that you were in before you went into ruku'. So if you're sitting down and you went into ruku' by bending forward, like we said you could do it in an earlier lesson, for someone who can't stand, your i'tidal would be just coming back up to the position you were in. If you're standing up, your i'tidal would be to stand straight up again as you were before you went into the bowing position. Okay, so the i'tidal obviously is an integral of prayer. So if you go into ruku', you'd have to come up before you go into sujood. So you can't go from the ruku' into sujood. That's the important part. Okay, and he says وَيَطْمَئِنُ فِيهِ وُجُوبًا, that a person their body again has to come to a complete stop. So for the ruku', their body has to come to a complete stop, and for the i'tidal, which is coming back up again, their body has to come to a complete stop again. So you can't make it like a fluid motion that you go into ruku' and then you come back up and you go right into sujood. Okay, that would mean that rukn is invalid. Okay, and that tuma'nina, or that your body coming to a complete stop, is obligatory in any kind of prayer you're doing. So whether or not, irrespective of whether the prayer is obligatory or non-obligatory, your body has to come to a complete stop in these arkan, or in these integrals of prayer. Okay, the author, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him, says, ثُمَّ السُّجُودُ مَرَّتَيْنِ ثُمَّ السُّجُودُ مَرَّتَيْنِ وَالْجُلُوسُ بَيْنَ السَّجْدَتَيْنِ, that's sitting between the two sajdas, وَيَطْمَئِنُّ وُجُوبًا فِي الْكُلِّ, that again, that a person's body comes to a complete stop in all of the integrals that he mentions. Okay, this is the next pillar. He's talking about prostrating 2 times in each unit of prayer. As-sujudu marratain, 2 times, that's in each unit of prayer. Okay. Yeah, I don't think I mentioned how many units of prayer are in the obligatory prayers. I may have. In Fajr there are 2 obligatory units of prayer. In Dhuhr there are 4. In Asr there are also 4. In Maghrib there are 3. And in Isha there are 4 obligatory units of prayer. Okay. I think I neglected to mention it because everybody knows it. Right. So the sajda, it has to be on 7 limbs. Sajda has to be on 7 limbs. So it has to be on your forehead. That's the first one. That's what I'll call a limb. Just 7 different parts of your body. The first one is your forehead. So you can't pray. Your forehead has to be uncovered. Okay? It's the only part of your body that we're going to mention that has to be uncovered when it touches the ground. So if you're wearing a hat or something like that, like if I'm wearing my hat and I cover my entire forehead like this, I can't pray on the hat. I have to pray on a part of my forehead. So at least part of my forehead. If part of your forehead's covered like this, I would still be praying on this part of my forehead. Okay, but if your entire forehead is covered, or you're not sure that you're actually praying on your forehead, then that wouldn't be sufficient in fulfilling this integral of prayer. So if you're wearing a turban or something like that and it's preventing your forehead from touching the ground, you have to move it up so that you can pray on your forehead. Or anything that could be preventing your forehead from touching the ground. Yeah. As opposed to something that is necessary. So if you have a wound or a cut or something like that, and you have a bandage or whatever, and it covers your forehead, that's a different case. That's by necessity. But if it's not because of necessity, and a hat or a turban or some kind of or that kind of thing isn't necessity, then no, your forehead would have to touch the ground. Okay, not the side of your head. So not obviously we're talking about the front part of the head, not the side of the head, and not your nose. So if a person were to make sujood or to perform sujood or to prostrate on the ground and they would only touch their nose on the ground and not their forehead, that wouldn't be sufficient. That wouldn't be a sufficient sujood. Okay, that's the first part of the body that has to be there, and the weight of the head has to be on the ground as well. Okay. When I say the weight of the head, I don't mean that a person has to press their head into the ground. That's not recommended. It's not a recommended act to press your head into the ground. It's just that you shouldn't make sujood by just touching your head on the ground such that it just touches lightly. They say that, or the books say that if imagine a piece of cotton were there between your forehead and the ground, that it would press it in, like it would depress it. So like the weight of your head is on the ground, and it's not just merely um, grazing the ground or touching it lightly. Okay, so that's the first part of the, or that's the first part of the body that has to be touching the ground. The second is a part of your palms or part of your fingers. From each hand. Okay, so if you were to make sujood and you were to just touch the part of the palms of your hand, for example, without the fingers, like let's say you were to make sujood like this, for example, that would be sufficient. It would be part of your fingers or or you to make sujood on your fingers, for example, like that would be sufficient as well. Okay, that's the second. So that's three so far, and it could be covered. Like you could be wearing gloves, for example. It's only the forehead that has to be covered. Sorry, that has to be uncovered. Um, so that's three so far. That's your forehead and your two hands, and your two knees, and that's five. And the toes, or the inside of the toes from your 2 feet, or to be more precise, part of the toe of the inside of the toes from both feet. Okay, at the very least. Okay, so that's seven. Those are the seven parts of the body that have to be touching the ground when you're making sujood. Okay, and that position of sujood would mean that a person's rear or their bottom would be higher than their head and their shoulders, and that's a condition for the sujood as well. Okay, that a person's bottom or their rear is actually higher than their head and their shoulders. Okay, and that's not difficult to do if these are the limbs that are touching the ground. Your bottom would naturally be higher. That's what sujood is. Okay, the next one that the author mentions is, he says, وَالْجُلُوسُ بَيْنَ السَّجْدَتَيْنِ. That's also obligatory. So between each sajda, or between each prostration, a person would sit down. In any position that would be considered sitting, it's obligatory. Okay, and he says, وَيَطْمَئِنُّ وُجُوبًا فِي الْكُلِّ, that a person comes to rest or comes to a stop, or that their body is at rest in all of the things that he mentions. Okay, the sitting between the sajdas and what we call i'tidal, which is coming up from the ruku', they're not intrinsically important in the prayer. They're not intrinsic aspects of the prayer. They're shorter rukuns. They're meant to be shorter integrals of prayer. They're sort of instituted as a break between the primary positions of prayer. So standing and ruku' and bowing, those are like the main aspects, and sitting down at the end, those are the main aspects of prayer. This coming up from the ruku' and sitting between the two sajdas, they're shorter, they're sort of breaks between the main parts of prayer. They're shorter rukuns. Okay, they haven't been instituted for their intrinsic importance. Okay, so you can't make them long. So if you do make them long, it would render your prayer invalid. So how do we differentiate what's long and what's short? So the i'tidal, which is standing up from the ruku', the position is the same position as standing up when you have to recite the Fatiha, right? So the guideline for what's long for that is the Fatiha. So if you make your i'tidal the length of the Fatiha, then that would invalidate your prayer. Okay? That's without a good reason, like for example, like the qunut that you have to recite, which we'll mention when we get to sunnah aspects of prayer or sunnah prayers. But for another reason, for any other reason, making it that long would render your prayer invalid. Okay, and the second thing that we said isn't a position of intrinsic importance is the sitting down between two sajdas. So that position is similar to sitting down at the end of your prayer, or sitting down after every 2 units of prayer. Okay, so if that sitting down between the two sajdas is as long as the shortest tashahhud, the recitation of the tashahhud, and we'll do the tashahhud today because it's an obligatory aspect of prayer. But if so, you'll have a clear idea of what I'm talking about. But if that sitting down, the period of the length of it is equal to the shortest tashahhud, then that also would invalidate your prayer. Okay, the author says, وَيَطْمَئِنُ وُجُوبًا فِي الْكُلِّ, that your body has to come to a rest in all of these things. Okay, and we've already gone over what itmi'nan is, so we won't mention it again. But it's a pillar. It's a pillar, and obviously important in the Shafi'i school. It's not a pillar in some other schools. So if you see someone else that they're praying kind of quickly, or they maybe don't reach that standard of itmi'nan that you know in the Shafi'i school, then don't be too quick to judge other people and to think to yourself or to look at him and say, well, hey, that person's prayer is invalid because their body hasn't come to a complete stop. Okay, it could be that they're following a different school, and this school doesn't consider it obligatory, or it doesn't have the same level of obligatoriness as it does in the Shafi'i school, and that's why they're not doing it that way. Okay, and that's not a kind of a soft relativism that everybody's right, but it's to acknowledge that other people have, or other different scholars have different ways of looking at things and approaching and dealing with available evidence, right? And that's one of the benefits of knowledge. So knowledge should make you less willing to criticize people and to judge other people, but it should make you aware of approaches to knowledge. Okay, they say that it shouldn't make you want to argue with people. Okay, scholars say that the more that a person knows, the less willing he is to criticize other people. Okay, the scholars say, كلما كان الإنسان أكثر علما كان أقل إنكارا. Say, كلما كان الإنسان أكثر علما كان أقل إنكارا. The more a person knows, the less willing they are to criticize other people, because he knows that there are various opinions and there are various interpretations, valid interpretations, and sound scholarship isn't restricted to a specific person or a specific school. Okay, so we've mentioned 4 places where of i'tidal, not i'tidal, of your body coming to a complete stop. We mentioned it in ruku' and i'tidal, that's coming up from ruku', and sujood, the 2 sajdas, and sitting between them. That's 4 places. So remember we said at the beginning that the number of integrals would differ depending on on whether or not you count this as a independent integral. So without these 4, your integrals would be 13. With the 4, your integrals would be 17 if you count them independently. Okay, so maybe that is a bit clearer now. Okay, the author says وَيَفْعَلُ بَاقِيَ الرَّكَعَةِ كَذَلِكَ. Okay, so all of the units, or the following units of prayer, you do them in the exact same way. So after you perform the second sajda, you'd come up and you'd continue in the same manner. You'd recite the Fatiha and then go into ruku', and then i'tidal, coming back up from it, and then you'd go back into sujood, and your body would come to a rest in all of those things. Okay. He says, وَالتَّشَهُدُ الْأَوَّلُ وَقُعُودُهُ سُنَّةٌ وَالتَّشَهُدُ الْأَخِيرُ وَالْجُلُوسُ فِيهِ فَرْضٌ. It says وَالتَّشَهُدُ الْأَوَّلُ وَقُعُودُهُ سُنَّةٌ وَالتَّشَهُدُ الْأَخِيرُ وَالْجُلُوسُ فِيهِ فرضٌ. The tashahhud, if a person says tashahhud, they might mean one of 2 things. They might mean reciting the tashahhud, or they might mean sitting in that position. Okay, here what we're talking about is reciting the tashahhud. When he says at-tashahhud, he means reciting the tashahhud, and that's why he mentions the two things, at-tashahhud wal-julus, or wal-qurud. So sitting down and reciting the tashahhud. So they're 2 separate things. Okay, the tashahhud is what you would recite in the sitting portion after every 2 units of prayer, or at the end of your prayer. So for example, in Fajr, which we said has 2 units of prayer, you'd have one you'd recite the tashahhud once after 2 units of prayer. In dhuhr, which is 4 rak'ahs or 4 units of prayer, there's 2 tashahhuds. The first one is after 2 units, and the second one is at the end of the prayer after 4 units. In maghrib, there's 2 as well. The first one would be after the first 2 units of prayer, and the second one would be at the end of the prayer after just 1 extra rak'ah or 1 extra unit of prayer. Okay. He says that reciting the first tashahhud and sitting for it is sunnah. It's sunnah. It's not a rukn. It's not an integral of prayer. So anything that you would recite in that tashahhud, and we'll get to what you recite in it, as well as the sending peace and blessings upon the Prophet ﷺ in that tashahhud, it's a sunnah. Okay, so if a person doesn't do it, is their prayer valid or invalid? The first tashahhud, it's valid. It's valid. Okay, and that's one of the benefits of knowing what is obligatory and what's not obligatory, or what's an integral and what's not an integral. So if you're praying dhuhr and you pray 2 units of prayer and then you forget to sit for the first tashahhud, for example, and you get back up and you continue on with your prayer, you wouldn't go back and perform that tashahhud because it's not a rukn. It's not an integral part of prayer. You would just continue with your prayer. Okay, and your prayer wouldn't be invalid. So if you finish your prayer and you think about it and you say, wait, I forgot to pray, or I forgot to sit down after 2 units of prayer, you might think, well, do I need to go back and perform a prayer again? No, because it's not an integral of prayer. Okay, we know that it's sunnah because the Prophet ﷺ didn't sit down, or it's reported the Prophet ﷺ in a dhuhr prayer forgot to sit down after 2 units of prayer, and that at the end of the prayer he performed in its stead a sujood of sahu, a sajda for forgetfulness. Okay, so if sitting for the first tashahhud was a rukn or an integral part of prayer, then a person would have to go back and do it. They couldn't just perform a sajda at the end of their prayer to make up for missing it. Okay, as opposed to a sunnah. A sunnah, you can make a sajda to make up for it. So the fact that the Prophet ﷺ performed a sajda of forgetfulness for it indicates to us that it is not an integral of prayer, but it's a sunnah. Okay. He says وَالتَّشَهُدُ الْأَخِيرُ وَالْجُلُوسُ فِيهِ فَرْضٌ, that the second tashahhud, or reciting the second tashahhud, is fard, and sitting for it. I'm calling it the second tashahhud, but it's actually the final tashahhud. So in some prayers, like the Fajr prayer, there's actually only 1 tashahhud after 2 rak'ahs of prayer, and it's neither first nor second. It's the only one. Okay, but in the rest of the prayers, the second one is the one that's obligatory, the one that you end the prayer with. Okay, he says وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ بَعْدَ التَّشَهُّدِ وَقَبْلَ السَّلَامِ فَرْضٌ. وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ بَعْدَ التَّشَهُّدِ وَقَبْلَ السَّلَامِ فَرْضٌ. Okay, and that's sending peace and blessings upon the Prophet ﷺ after reciting the tashahhud. As he says, بَعْدَ التَّشَهُّدِ, it's obligatory. Okay, if you do it before the tashahhud, then it doesn't count, so to speak. You'd have to recite it again after the tashahhud. And he says, وَقَبْلَ السَّلَامِ, obviously, because the salam is what you'd end the prayer, or what ends your prayer, so it has to be after the tashahhud and before you end your prayer. He says, وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. That's the fard, or the obligatory, or the integral aspect. Sending peace and blessings upon his family is sunnah. Okay, the author, rahimahullah, says, وَالسَّلَامُ مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ فَرْضٌ. وَالسَّلَامُ مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ فَرْضٌ وَأَقَلُّ السَّلَامِ السَّلَامُ عَلَيْكُمْ. Okay, that saying the salam, which ends your prayer, is an obligatory aspect. And the minimalist salam is to say, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. Okay, the author says, As-salamu min as-salati fardun. So he's talking about the first salam, that a person would say. So they can say Assalamu alaikum and Assalamu alaikum, that's two. But the first one is obligatory and the second one is sunnah. Okay, the first one's obligatory and the second one is sunnah, as well as turning for both of them. So if you turn and say Assalamu alaikum, the turning is for the first one. If you were to turn and say Assalamu alaikum, saying it would be fard, but turning for it would be sunnah. The second one, if you were to say Assalamu alaikum and turn, both things would be sunnah, both turning and both saying. Okay, that's his minimalist salam, Assalamu alaikum. The complete version would be Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and the mercy of Allah. Okay, that's the salam. A person's chest has to be facing the qibla. A person's chest has to be facing the qibla in the entire prayer. But sometimes people mention it here in the salam because sometimes people turn their chests away from the qibla when they're making the salam. So they don't just turn their head, but they might just turn their entire body and say like Assalamu alaikum and turn their entire body. So that would invalidate your prayer. You can't do that. You have to keep your chest facing the qibla for the entire prayer. Okay, those are all of the arkan. Some authors also mention tartib, which is doing these things in order. This author doesn't mention it, but it's obvious because he presents it in the correct order. Okay. Finally, the author says وَأَقَلُّ تَشَهُدِ الْوَاجِبِ, and here the author is going to tell you what the minimalist tashahhud is that a person has to say in their prayer. So he says وَأَقَلُّ تَشَهُدِ الْوَاجِبِ التَّحِيَّاتُ لِلَّهِ السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Here, I'll read it again. He says التحيات لله السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Okay, and instead of saying وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله, you can also say وأن محمدا رسول الله. وأن محمدا رسول الله. Okay, and this is given in the text, so you can find it there, as well as the translation. At-tahiyyatu lillah means greetings to Allah. Or at-tahiyyat, sorry, means greetings. But at-tahiyyatu lillah, there's various explanations for it. At-tahiyyatu lillah just means that anything that could be said as a greeting, whether it's praise or exaltation of a person, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether you're exalting him for his ownership, for his authority, for his greatness, all of that belongs to him. That's what it means to say at-tahiyyatu lillah. All of such greetings belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, the rest you have the translation for it. Peace be upon you, O Prophet. Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabi wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. That the mercy of Allah and His blessings. Assalamu alayna wa ala ibadillahi salihin. That peace be on us and all of the righteous servants. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. This is the testimony of faith, that I bear witness that there is no God other than Allah. Wa anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. That Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is His servant and His messenger. And he says, Assalamu alayka. That is, Assalam here just means peace and security from any and all ills. That's Assalam. Okay. The author says that this is the aqall tashahhud, that's a minimalist tashahhud. The complete or the fuller tashahhud isn't very different from it. Okay, there are two variations on it. One is from the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud. He says instead of at-tahiyyat at the beginning, instead of at-tahiyyatu lillah, assalamu alayka at the beginning, he just has it as at-tahiyyatu lillahi was-salawatu at-tayyibat, or was-salawatu wat-tayyibat. At-tahiyyatu lillahi was-salawatu wat-tayyibat. So the translation is the same, at-tahiyyatu lillahi, and then was-salawatu, the prayers, wat-tayyibat, and all good things, assalamu alayka. And he continues with the same tashahhud that we described. Okay, there's a fuller or a variant on that. That's from the hadith of Ibn Abbas, um, and in it he adds mubarakat and salawatun tayyibat at the beginning. So he says at-tahiyyatul mubarakat, that blessed greetings, at-tahiyyatul mubarakat. Then he says as-salawatul tayyibat lillah. He says at-tahiyyatul mubarakat, as-salawatul tayyibat lillah. Okay, so it's similar to the one of Ibn Mas'ud, except that it adds the al-mubarakat, and that is the one that is considered the fullest and the most complete tashahhud in the Shafi'i school. And the rest of the tashahhud stays the same. Okay, finally, the author, rahimahullah, says, وَأَقَلُّ الصَّلَاةِ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم صل على محمد. وأقل الصلاة, that's the minimalist prayers that you can send for the Prophet ﷺ, that you have to say in that sitting position after the tashahhud and before the salam, is Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So if you say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, that is sufficient in fulfilling that rukn or that integral of prayer that we mentioned earlier. Okay, most people don't restrict themselves to that minimalist prayer upon the Prophet ﷺ, but they're more familiar with a version of what's called the Abrahamic prayer. Okay, and Imam Ibn Hajar in his Tuhfa, he mentions a more fuller version, and I'll tell you what it is. He says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin abdika wa rasulik, that Allah send or venerate the Prophet, your servant and your messenger. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin abdika wa rasulik, al-Nabi al-Ummi, the unlettered Prophet, wa ala ali Muhammad, his family as well, wa azwajihi wa dhurriyatihi, his wives and his progeny, kama sallayta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim fil alamina innaka hamidun majid, that as you venerated Ibrahim and the family of Ibrahim, and you are full of praise and majesty in the world. وَبَارِكْ عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ النَّبِيِّ الْأُمِّي وَعَلَى آلِ مُحَمَّدٍ وَأَزْوَاجِهِ وَذُرِّيَّتِهِ كَمَا بَارَكْتَ عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَعَلَى آلِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ فِي الْعَالَمِينَ إِنَّكَ حَمِيدٌ مَجِيدٌ, that bless Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the unlettered Prophet, his family, his wives, and his progeny, as you blessed Ibrahim and his family. You are full of praise and majesty in the worlds. Okay, and that's mentioned by Imam Ibn Hajar in his Tuhfa. Okay, and that brings us to the end of a description of the pillars or the integral aspects of prayer. And in our next lesson, we will consider some sunnah aspect of prayers, and we'll talk about things that render the prayer invalid as well. And so we'll stop at that point. وصل اللهم وسلم وزد وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.